Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, hundreds of children, some with special needs, are rescued from a Khartoum orphanage after having spent weeks stuck amidst the shelling and shooting of Sudan's war. Also, millions have been forced from their homes in Burkina Faso and over 15,000 killed since an extremist insurgency began undermining the country in 2015. Despite the scale of the suffering, it's the world's most neglected crisis. And for World Ocean Day, we head to Kenya, where some industrial fishing techniques have been banned to try and roll back some of the damage being suffered by coastal communities who've seen their fish stocks plummeted. But first, the Red Cross has rescued hundreds of children, babies, and dozens of staff from an orphanage caught in the crossfires of warring generals in Sudan's capital. The evacuees had reportedly spent weeks amidst the country's raging conflict without access to healthcare. Stresses that would overwhelm most people, but were particularly painful for some of the special needs children who were trapped in the institution. Caroline Lamberley with more.
Under the cover of darkness, these vehicles from the International Committee of the Red Cross braved the streets of the Sudanese capital Khartoum on Wednesday night. Their mission was to evacuate the Maigoma orphanage, the biggest in the country. Overnight, around 300 children were brought to a safe location in Wad Medani, around 200 kilometers southeast of Khartoum.
It's really in the midst of the conflict, so you have front lines which are 800 meters from the orphanage. We are really very happy that we could carry out this operation, so this was requested by both parties. These children have been there for the past 6 weeks, so it was really for us really a relief to see that we could bring them to safety now, and that they can also get the proper medical health care.
The orphanage made headlines last month when news broke that around 70 children had died there from dehydration and malnutrition. Fighting had prevented most staff from reaching the orphanage and attending to the children.
Sadly, I witnessed most of their deaths and funerals. So our message to the world: evacuate the orphanage from Khartoum to a safe city with a safe pathway.
The healthcare system is one of the casualties of the current conflict between the Sudanese army and the RSF paramilitary group. Between the bombings and frequent electricity outages and water cuts, most hospitals in the capital have been forced to shut.
Well, Burkina Faso says that 21 people, most of whom were members of the security forces, have been killed in an extremist attack in Sawenga in the east. Currently, about a third of the country is controlled by jihadists, and more than 15,000 people have been killed in an insurgency that began in 2015. More than 2 million people have been displaced. This week, the country topped a list of the world's most neglected crises. The one in DR Congo comes second. The Norwegian Refugee Council's called for international organisations and donor countries to show the same engagement with emergencies in Africa as they have with the war in Ukraine. For more on this, I'm joined now by Tom Pere-Costa from the NRC. Tom, thanks very much for making time to speak to me. Now, first of all, give us a bit more of an overview of the nature of the crisis in Burkina Faso and why it's getting worse.
Thank you, Georgia. Yes, families in Burkina Faso are really suffering from unprecedented levels of violence. Villages are being attacked, families are being killed, and they have to flee. We've met people who had to flee 4 times already since the beginning of the crisis. On top of that, you have more than 900,000 people trapped in areas under blockade by armed groups. We can't reach them by road, and most of them, to survive, have to eat leaves and salt barely. So our only way to reach them is via helicopter and to provide a little bit of help. But obviously, it is not a sustainable solution. We can't help everyone only with a helicopter support. And despite this, it's getting worse because the crisis is being largely neglected by the world. The crisis is less than 50% funded in 2022, which means that basically we have barely enough money to answer to half of the needs. Families really suffer in a deafening silence from the world currently.
Now, what are the details of these differences that you've observed in terms of the international response to the crisis in Ukraine and those in Burkina Faso and in DR Congo or other African conflicts? So when you're talking about differences, are you just talking about aid, or are there other ways that you define tension or engagement? There is clearly an international discrimination, but in many ways, it's not only about aid. For each dollar received by a displaced person in Africa, in the neglected crisis in Africa or in Latin America as well, 3 is received by a Ukrainian refugee, just to give you an example. And as I said, it's not only about funding at all, because Burkina Faso, DRC and the other crises also suffer from a lack of media attention. To put things in perspective, in 2022, there were 6 times more media articles on the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine than in the neglected crisis in Africa and in Latin America combined. So we've seen that with the Ukraine crisis, when there is a political will, the action can be swift, the borders can be open, the aid can flow. So this is what we need to see for this neglected crisis. And really the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine should be the standard for all the crises, really. So is there something about the response to Ukraine that you think can be learned in terms of better treating the crises in Africa? Well, of course, but not only, because really it's also a lack of political engagement in Africa and in Latin America, because addressing these protracted crises, because most of them are protracted. Burkina Faso is a very young crisis, but for example, in DRC, families have suffered for more than 20 years. They have suffered of violence. They have been killed for more than 20 years. And to address that, we need to overcome donor fatigue, because the only fatigue acceptable, really, is the one on the faces of children who have suffered from violence for years now. So we need to see that. We need to see more media attention on these crises. It's good that we have programs like yours, but it's not really the case, really. And we need political leaders, to find really political solution, because neglect is a choice, and we need the world to choose to stop this neglect. And what else do you hope to come out of some of the vast range of issues that you've raised in this latest report from the Norwegian Refugee Council? Well, we need to see the end of this clear double standard, really. And as I said, we need Ukraine to be the standard for all humanitarian crisis. Neglect is really a choice, and we see that when the world decides to fully engage in answering to the needs, it can happen. So this is the perfect example right now. The Ukrainian crisis in 2022 was funded 90%. 90% of the money needed was received. On average, in the neglected crisis, they have received less than 50%. So this really needs to change. Thank you very much, Tom Pera-Costa from the Norwegian Refugee Council. Now, June 8th marks World Ocean Day, a chance to celebrate the seas that sustain so much life in our world. Too often, we don't do a great job of looking after these vital resources. In Kenya, coastal villages are paying the price of industrial overfishing. Our correspondents went to have a look.
For over 20 years, Umaya has been fishing along the Kenyan coast, but his average catch has been getting smaller. Marine stocks have plummeted due to overfishing in the Indian Ocean.
It's the fault of all the industrial fishing vessels that come here. In our village, we traditionally fish tuna. Fishermen used to catch up to 200 kilos of tuna, as well as other species.
Kenyans are not the main drivers of overfishing, but they're paying the highest price. Research institutes analyze daily catches and try to find local solutions. Even if they can't influence what happens at sea, they provide fishing tools to preserve the coastal ecosystem.
This one is a traditional basket trap, and it is fully made of reeds. And this has been a journey that we have had with the community here. So we have co-developed this with them, and we have seen a lot of improvements in the kind of catches that they are getting. And basically, there is a very big reduction in juvenile retention.
Shifting to more sustainable fishing techniques is important, but so is restoring what's already been damaged. These women received training from the Research Institute to rehabilitate mangroves.
This place is good for us and our families. The fish are born here and grow up in the mangrove. Our community earns more and more money because of that.
Researcher Joan Kawaka says authorities have to do more to raise awareness on the importance of marine sustainability amongst coastal communities.
So if you get the support of the government and you get the support within the community themselves in terms of enforcement, and compliance will come about if the community understands the importance of these ecosystems and also if they see the benefits of these ecosystems.
Grassroots awareness of the cost of overfishing is important, but global action is essential. This includes industrial actors, particularly those from Europe.
Well, that's it for Eye in Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Till then, take care.